We're going over system concepts, the basics, volume 1 introduction, classes.
Theory. There have been countless situations where people can have a conversation with each other and misinterpret each other's words as if they were speaking different languages. There are people that the individual feels like they understand them, while others seem to be incompatible with their tendencies and behavior. It has been hypothesized that men and women think differently. This can be taken a step further. Individuals can be categorized into different classes that describe their thinking patterns, emotional handling, and behavioral tendencies. It is known that humans are not identical. Each person has base characteristics, personality traits, physical tendencies that are affected by their environment. The base character that a person is born with is identified with a specific class. An individual can greatly improve their communication with others and the handling of themselves by identifying their own class and the classes of others. Observing the body language, the actions, the responses, and the thought patterns of a person can be used to identify the class of a human being.
Classifications. The classes are called Abraham, Isaac, Yitzhak, Jacob, Yaakov, and Joseph, Yosef. They are taken from the names of the patriarchs in the Bible. Study of the stories of the Bible can reveal more insights on the classes, their behavior, attitude, and characteristics. These classifications of people can help them throughout the maturation of their perception. The class names are gender neutral and therefore apply to male and female equally, though they are originally male names. The elements of water, fire, wind, and earth may be used interchangeably when a more gender-independent approach is desired. Knowing these classifications allows an individual to identify the people they interact with in order to understand their environment in a more dynamic manner. They can react differently to each person depending on their identified class in order to match their response to the conversation. This can easily improve communication between individuals who have found interaction frustrating and confusing.
Pain point. Unlike behavior identifications such as introvert, one who looks inward, and extrovert, one who looks outward, the classes identify the pleasure and pain triggers within an individual. A pleasure or pain point is triggered by situations and events. They activate a response in the individual and provoke a reaction accordingly. The same class can cover two individuals, where one is an introvert who looks inwards, while another is an extrovert who looks outwards. One could be private-oriented, while another attention-seeking, and still share the same class. Each class has a different pain point, a consistent scenario that is perceived by each class. All locks, painful experiences that are attracted by the individual are colored, experienced through the person's pain point. So the same physical event can be experienced differently by each type. Each person has a single pain point with multiple locks that are revealed through their pain point as if preset into their experience. A person cannot change their class through their life. Therefore, it should be accepted so that their focus can instead be to gradually unlock the locked gates in their perception. This is in order to enter the chambers of greatness, the attainment of complete expression.
Identification. Each class has an element associated with it. Abraham is water, Isaac is fire, Jacob is wind, and Joseph is earth. Additionally, each class is comprised of judgment or kindness in their externality or internality. Internality means what situations a person attracts to themselves. Externality means how they interact with those situations. Judgment means a pushing force, while kindness means a pulling force. It is important for the individual to seriously examine their reactions to the environment, to identify their class and not fall into looking for attributes themselves in order to classify themselves in the class they aspire to be. Generally speaking, the class that causes the individual the most irritation is most often their class, since it activates their pain point more frequently. Adjustments can be made as reality helps clarify by giving feedback on whether the individual's discernments are correctly aligned. These discernments are crucial since the classes describe the base nature of the individual.
So the first question, what do the classifications identify in a person? Cedric.
It identifies the way they behave within their environment and how they interact with others.
Joyce.
It identifies their internality and their feelings about their internality and their feelings about their externality.
Mark.
They identify a person's base tendencies and also what triggers their pain points. Thank you.
Moshe.
It identifies how they interact with reality, as we know. Also, what type of reality they're creating. It also identifies their thought, their way of thinking, what affects them, what negatively or positively. Basically, is a bit of a blueprint of the person itself.
Robin.
It identifies their pushing force, judgment, or pulling force, kindness, where that is situated within the individual and how that they react with the environment and what kind of situations they pull towards them. So the more if there's no judgment, then a good reality is pulled toward them. And then where the judgment is placed within, if it's within the inner part of them, then that's where their judgment is. That's where things are pulled. And with Yakov's the judgment on the outside, so they deal with situations as they come to them, and so forth. I mean, it identifies what kind of environment you're pulling towards you and where you're having to struggle with reality.
Maria writes, there are different tunnels of vision, how they see, like different unchangeable pairs of glasses. The classification identifies which glasses they have. The classes are basically patterns of behavior. They take people and notice that they have common ways they think, they feel, they look at life, and sort of divide it into these types, into these classes, to allow a person to understand who they're talking to and understand why they can feel different from somebody else and think different from somebody else. And there are various methods and systems out there that also, do these kind of classifications. The unique take that we do in System of Concepts is that they're based on the characters in the Bible, so it like enriches it with so much background of patterns that a person can look into and understand themselves better. Second question, what is a pain point? Cedric.
It's something that triggers a reaction, and this thing might not be the same for another person. The reaction would be different.
Joyce.
I think they're felt as internal feelings of a deficiency or something about ourselves that we would like to change, maybe that we are embarrassed about, or perhaps just feel that we have a weakness in that area.
Mark.
The situation that happens in reality, or it can even be a thought that creates a negative emotional reaction in the individual.
Moshe.
Pain point is something that the person is attracting and it's affecting him. It's causing him pain and he doesn't even know what it is. And it can be very much reoccurring as well until he really identifies it and accepts it. And you know, so yeah.
Robin.
Pain point is the point through which we experience reality, and it's specific to the classes. So Abraham, for instance, experiences it through their environment, through experience reality through other people and their environment. And so every class experiences reality through a different point, and it usually shapes their perception on reality.
Maria writes, pain point is the way a thought has been translated into emotion. It specifically triggers the innate behavior pattern. Yeah, so the pain point that afterwards converts into a power point is basically the tendency of an individual to feel, to respond to situations, to either to external stimuli or to thoughts that rise in them, and it's like their base character response to situations. And sort of if an experience occurs, an event occurs, people with different classes will focus on different areas in that event. So for example, Isaac will focus more about how they felt towards the event. The Avram will be focused more on the event itself. Jacob will be focused on what they could have done in the event. And the Josephs would be focused more on the values that were associated with that event. Third question, how does an individual correctly evaluate their class? Cedric.
It would be best for one to know how are the other classes, what defines them, and then try to identify with one of them to see if that fits. And the other one that was read was that when something clicks with another person, that you might be that class too.
Jeffrey.
Oh, sorry, guys. Yeah, like Cedric said, it's knowing the characteristics of the other classes, and we can be more in touch with ourselves, identify ourselves and what our characteristics are in comparison. You know, it gives us the contrast and the context that we can do that. And I think, you know, I was told I'm a Yakov, and I do feel comfortable with that. I do have, you know, the characteristics of that class. So yeah, it's very helpful. And like I say, a lot easier than the 12 zodiac signs, you know.
Joyce.
It does help a lot to look at the group and to see if you can identify that your feelings are matching someone else. And then when you've done that and you realize that whatever someone is saying seems to ring a bell, or you're nodding your head to whatever they're saying, then there might be a good chance that that person has the same class that you have.
Mark.
Well, this evaluation can actually be a little tricky, but basically you have to look back and see how in the past you have responded to different things. What characteristics do you align with the most? But there's subtleties here, because obviously even if you are a Yitzhak or an Isaac, or a Yitzhak or an Abraham, it doesn't matter which class you are going to have tendencies to have similar characteristics to other classes, but it's going to be more of a base, or something that has stuck with you in the past, or something you have experienced in the past the most. Confusing.
Moshe.
Well, I would say, first of all, to observe the tendencies of a person and see how it relates to the class. That's number one. Number two, the pain point. Sort of think about what pain point am I really having issues with. If I were to, try to figure out who I was, what's my pain point. And then thirdly, I would say is get a opinion from somebody else. Talk to them, because you're not going to see things that they see. So it's more taking a look, getting an objective look from someone else, and that kind of try to put the pieces together and try to figure out where you are.
Robin.
Yes, you have to learn all the characteristics of all the classes and then try to evaluate where you fit in. And then, like has been said, you kind of poke around within yourself, like with a screwdriver in a wall socket, and when you hit your pain point, you know which class you are.
Maria writes, it's important to identify the class one is and not the one would like to be. The analysis of pain point can give clues to one's class. And Jenny writes, you can work with others that have the same class as they can help you along your path. Again, like identifying anything like your face, your state, your class, it's normally a combination of the person using the materials to self-evaluate themselves, and then bringing that evaluation to the group, and then seeing if the group agrees, and if they disagree, to sort of find out, why they disagree, and maybe they are right, maybe they're wrong. And by having a discussion and a conversation, it can allow to not only find what, the correct class of the individual, but also to strengthen the confidence in that class. And it could be that the class is unknown, especially when someone's at the beginning of their advancement. And it could be that the class is misidentified. But the important thing to remember is that the identification is what changed, not the class of a person. A person keeps the same class, from the day he's born until the day he dies. But the identification of his class could be incorrect at the beginning, and later on, when the person advances more and shows more of his characteristics, then you can sort of more closely identify what class they are. So let's read again. Go for it.
theory. There have been countless situations where people can have a conversation with each other and misinterpret each other's words as if they were speaking different languages. There are people that the individual feels like they understand them, while others seem to be incompatible with their tendencies and behavior. It has been hypothesized that men and women think differently. This can be taken a step further. Individuals can be categorized into distinct classes that describe their thinking patterns, emotional handling, and behavioral tendencies. It is known that humans are not identical. Every person has base characteristics, personality traits, physical tendencies that are affected by their environment. The base character that a person is born with is identified with a specific class. An individual can greatly improve their communication with others and the handling of themselves by identifying their own class and the classes of others. Observing the body language, the actions, the responses, and the thought patterns of a person can be used to identify the class of a human being.
I remember when we discovered the concept of classes about a year ago. I remember the uproar that came because a lot of what happens with the phases, the states, the classes, and continue concepts that can identify things is that people feel either that it limits them or they feel they're being discriminated upon. But the solution is never to get rid of the identifications themselves, but rather how the reaction to those identifications, those change over time. So the idea is not to make people totally ambiguous and they could be anything. And we can see this whole conversation happening now in, for example, the transgender community, where do we keep the identifications? Do we get rid of the identifications? Do we change the way we respond to the identifications? And what I've seen, and I want to know what all of you have seen, that the classes actually increase and actually improve communication. So I'd say that if an identification improves communication, then it's going to be more productive. What do you all think?
The classes really helped me to understand that we are all different, that we can't expect fish to climb a tree, and it made me less judgmental. And I just think it's a great, great way of understanding yourself and understanding other people, and to stream with yourself and to stream with the environment, because you realize that there are a lot of different characters. Yeah.
I agree. Knowing the other classes helps you understand the other people, but it also pulls you out of yourself, because initially I think we feel like everybody's just like us and we can't figure out why they're not responding the same way, why they seem so confused and unable to do certain things. And it pulls us out of seeing the world just through our own class into other people and other classes, seeing how they respond, how they look out from within themselves and evaluate reality. And it helps immensely in bringing communication together with the other classes and that understanding.
That's an excellent point, Robin. And the funny thing is I never saw it as somebody else being confused. I could never figure out, it was always so perplexing, what was wrong with me? Why couldn't I see the situation? What was I missing in the situation? I thought everybody felt, saw, and interacted with things exactly like I did. And yet I was always perplexed when things always blew up or things always went drastically wrong. What was wrong with me? If everybody was the same, how come I was having such an adverse reaction to all of this. So, good point.
There's a very old book called I'm Okay, You're Okay. And it seems like once you take people and you break them apart as far as their characteristics and their desires and how they're different from you, you realize how everyone is okay and that that's a good thing.
Let's move along. Go for it.
Classifications. These classes are called Abraham, Isaac, Yitzchak, Jacob, Yaakov, and Joseph, Yosef. They're taken from the names of the patriarchs in the Bible. Study of the stories of the Bible can reveal more insights on the classes, their behavior, attitude, and characteristics. These classifications of people can help them throughout the maturation of their perception. The class names are gender neutral and therefore apply to male and female equally, though they are originally male names. The elements of water, fire, wind, and earth may be used interchangeably when a more gender-independent approach is desired. Knowing these classifications allows an individual to identify the people they interact with in order and understand their environment in a more dynamic manner. They can react differently to each person depending on their identified class in order to match their response to the conversation. This can easily improve communication between individuals who have found interaction frustrating and confusing.
What do you think, Moshe?
Yeah, so just to kind of talk about this. I think, first of all, understanding of the classes is so powerful, because it's in regards to communication, and then just kind of taking on the last sentence, right? It's really is a way to control the communication, because you understand the tendencies of the other person, and you don't fall into the trap of this interplay where one person is talking Chinese and the other person is talking Spanish. It's like this lack of communication, almost like the story of the Tower of Babylon, where everybody was speaking different languages, nobody could understand anybody. So it actually kind of goes to that a little bit. But I think it's really good because you can understand them and better communicate, because that's obviously can be difficult at times with humans. So that right there is a very powerful feature to this.
Anybody else?
I think that last sentence here says a lot. This can easily improve communication between individuals who have found interaction frustrating and confusing. Yes, these classifications do exactly that. It's wonderful.
Jenny writes, it's good to have the classifications. It can help us by knowing what we are going through. Communication is very important with our advancement. I totally agree. I would say that when you take the phases sort of dictate that everyone will feel a certain set of conditions or scenario, like sort of feelings, sensations, and stuff like that. And when you combine it with the classes, it gives, you could say, more variety. So that when someone feels slight differences, it's the combination of the phase they're in, the state they're in, and the class they are. Especially when you start to understand that someone could have a class and a subclass, and it can go until infinity. We normally deal with two levels. So we deal with the main class and the subclass. We don't normally go to a third level. But the idea is that sort of it's sets of patterns. Also, the phases are sets of patterns. The states are set of patterns. The classes have set of patterns. And the idea is that when we're accumulating these concepts, we're accumulating patterns and adding them on top of each other to know how to deal with different different situations by identifying the common patterns within them. What do you think, Robin?
I wanted to add the elements of water, fire, wind, and earth. I think that's so accurate in my observation personally about my class and other classes on how they experience emotions, changes, and so forth. As an example, I think Jeffrey Jacob Yakov says that when he's going through emotional changes, it feels like wind. It feels like a hurricane or something. And I know as an Avraham, I feel things as water. I always say, well, it's just like the dam broke or so forth. And Joseph's are like earth. They really are like earth. You feel them like earth. They feel so connected to and powerful and strong. And I just think these things really work in the classifications.
What do you think, Joyce?
Yeah, I think the classification system is very, very helpful. It helped me to understand myself a lot better. I found myself spending a lot of time thinking about the people that I work with and why they're like they are. It's like someone has already said, I don't remember who, was talking about how it pulls us out of ourselves and makes us think about the others. It's a great system. It's very, very helpful to have it.
What do you think, Mark?
Well, I think it's pretty amazing. The hard part for me still is, and I guess practice makes perfect, but is to try to see other people, especially new people that you meet, people that come into your life or people you interact with, trying to figure out which class they are so you know what way is most effective to communicate with them. But it's really helpful for me to know my own characteristics because it explains why I have the reactions I do. So, good stuff.
You know, when we talk about the elements of water, fire, wind, and earth, it's basically water is Abraham, fire is Isaac, wind is Jacob, and earth is Joseph. And a lot of when you start studying the differences in those elements, you see them apply to the classes very nicely.
And that comes straight off the 10 Sephiroth designations, doesn't it?
Yes, definitely. A lot of what we're dealing with in the basics is, it might, look like psychology, but the idea is that we've taken Kabbalah concepts and made them in a language that is more understandable. And I'll definitely say that the basics has helped people cross the barrier much faster and also reach higher degrees accordingly, because it's written in a very simple language. Let's move on.
Pain point. Unlike behavior identifications, such as introvert, one who looks inward, and extrovert, one who looks outward, the classes identify the pleasure and pain triggers within an individual. A pleasure or pain point is triggered by situations and events. They activate a response in the individual and provoke a reaction accordingly. The same class can cover two individuals, where one is an introvert who looks inwards, while the other is an extrovert who looks outwards. One could still be private-oriented, while another attention-seeking, and still share the same class. Each class has a different pain point, a consistent scenario that is perceived by each class. All locks, painful experiences that are attracted by the individual are colored experienced through the person's pain point. So the same physical event can be experienced differently by each type. Each person has a single pain point with multiple locks that are revealed through their pain point as if preset into their experience. A person cannot change their class throughout their life. Therefore, it should be accepted so that their focus can instead be to gradually unlock the locked gates in their perception. This is in order to enter the chambers of greatness, the attainment of complete expression.
You know, in the coming articles, we're going to be going over all the differences of the classes and stuff, and this is more like a general overview of concepts that we constantly talk about. We talk about the pain points, we talk about the classes, and the pain point is constantly felt along the path, because anytime you feel a lock, anytime tension is felt, it always is drawn through the pain point of the person. Isaac will always have that self-criticism, that self-emotion, and be focused on what they're going through more than what others are going through. And even if they are dealing with others, they're still dealing with how they should have responded to the other person. They're always focused on self. And by a person, knowing their class, they can then know how they're going to be constantly be hit and what is going to be the sort of the common pattern that no matter what happens will always activate them. What do you think, Robin?
Oh, I agree with that thoroughly. My mind was just going to the fact that that all the classes are in third discernment, Zerampin, and it's the group phase. So it's structurally, I think, very interesting, because it's like the inner workings of how a group works, in fact. So, I don't know, just a small observation.
I actually like that observation, because it is interesting how, in the phases, you're right, the classes are in the group phase. It's like, that's where they're discussed. So even though those apply to, anybody, whether they're, advancement or not, whether they're in the group or not, but the conversation on them only occurs in the group. So you can see that alignment that the classes of Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Yosef, which are basically kindness, judgment, beauty, and foundation, which is Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, and Yesod, they play their part in the group. And of course, they play also in life itself, but the discussion, the scrutiny on the classes is definitely done in the group. What do you think, Mark?
Well, I think one of the things that I like in here is that it mentions down there in the first paragraph that the same class can cover two individuals, where one is an introvert who looks inward, while the other is an extrovert who looks outward. That's something that I've begun to notice too, that even people of the same class kind of react or come across differently, or I perceive them differently, and this is one of the reasons why. So even though you are an Abraham, you could still be an introvert or an extrovert. So that kind of changes how you are perceived by other people in your reality. Good.
And it is to remember that the classes, they don't limit a person. The classes are observing patterns in a person. And those patterns were always there. So identifying patterns in a person doesn't limit them. It actually enables them to learn more about themselves and understand how they are sort of more predictable in their behavior. What do you think, Cedric?
I'm actually thinking on the logs in the pain point, because it says that a person only has one pain point, correct? So all the logs would be related to that pain point, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, the way that the pain will sort of come into the person will be through their pain point.
And that can mean many locks.
Well, every lock will be experienced in that sort of consistent response to it. Like Josephs normally attracts situations where their value system, their morals, their ethics are questioned. They're constantly dealing with validation issues. So the same scenario, the same event itself could happen to two people, but the Joseph one will always be sort of like struggling with like the way that people behaved. Do they behave correctly or not? Well, let's say in Isaac will be sort of more about like worrying and having fears of like, oh, did I do it right? Why did I do this to myself? So you've got two different classes in the same event, and they're going to experience it through their pain point.
Yes, but what would be the need to have many logs that refer to one single pain point? That's something that I'm trying to figure out. Would it be that the system is trying to teach you that there are some deficiencies related to that pain point, and that is a way to realize that you have that specific pain point, perhaps?
Think of a pain point like a city, right? Just because it's one city doesn't mean that you can only enter the city from one place. There are multiple entry points, there's multiple exit points, there's multiple things that happen in that city. So you still call it a single city, but it includes a variety of responses in that city. So the idea of the logs is to sort of show the different sides of that same pain point, like looking around a mountain.
Okay, I get it. Thanks.
The idea is that we can only basically find ourselves based on contact, right? Based on, if we don't have thoughts and we don't have emotions and we don't have sensations, we can't learn about ourselves. We can't learn about our patterns. We need responses. We need things to occur in order to identify patterns. You can't identify a pattern if there's no manifestation. So the pain point allows to sort of know where to look, you could say, and sort of be predisposed to certain patterns. Jenny writes, patterns can help you identify as long as we don't resist what we are feeling. Resisting makes things so much harder, and sometimes we don't want to face what hurts us, but we must have an open mind, an open heart, so we can hear what someone is saying in order to help us and to feel more deeply. Yeah, very important. Anybody else?
Yes, please. I feel I just need to share how much the classes and the learning about pain points helped me. For so many years, I tripped myself up with the same pain point, and I knew what it was, but I couldn't really identify what it is. And I've worked so hard on it, and I really have overcome so much. And I've really come to understand you guys so much. And I've really learned not to judge myself so much, to become more stronger and more giver on the outside, and more kind to myself on the inside. And I would never have been able to do this. Dang it, I'm crying again, and I don't want to cry, but this time the tears are different.
What are you crying about?
Because I'm so happy that I know who I am and I can deal with the situations. It's a different kind of cry. It's a cry of relief. I really feel top of the world. I've worked through a lot of stuff, and I feel great. And I just want to tell all of you that you've been part of this in a big way. I don't chat so much, but I always read everything. And I feel you. I don't need to speak to you. I feel you. And I just want to say thank you.
I would say one of the big differences between what they do in the society and what we do in the group. In the society, they try to make people the same. Like, you all have a point in the heart, you're all, human, and you all want to connect. And it's all about like trying to ignore the differences. And here we actually enhance the differences. We're like, not only, I'm a man, you're a woman, but the classes, and you've got the phases and the states and the tiers, and you've got all these different categorizations that I remember when we were starting to reveal them slowly in the group, there were people that opposed and thought that, oh, by knowing where someone is spiritually, or when, knowing someone's class, that would cause differences to be raised in the group, and that would cause separation. And the funny thing, what happened was that the opposite occurred. We were actually able to understand people. Like, for example, if an Isaac, is, crying in a session, there's going to be sort of more tolerance for it. Well, let's say if a Joseph was crying, that would raise alarms. There's something wrong and something needs to be taken care of. So the class allows you to know people's tendencies. That, for example, Isaac's are much more emotional. I'm an Isaac, so I know that. And we're more fear-oriented as well. And we struggle in our emotion. So being aware of it, it allows you to sort of take people's responses, easier into consideration. Like, you'll have, Avrams are more tendency to annul and stuff. So you'll, like, when they do, you won't see that as a negative, you'll see that as a positive. But when you see, let's say, a Joseph annulling, you're like, okay, you're questioning, it's like something's wrong here. How do I return them to their, critical, judgmental selves? So by actually knowing the pain points, it allows you to know how people respond and sort of take it into proportion. And I would say that these differences actually made the group stronger, not weaker.
Yeah, I love what Nakama said and expressed about herself. I think it's so absolutely true. One of my biggest locks was associated with my class and my response to my class. And I didn't like it. I didn't like what I was hearing about on Abraham. And it opened up one of my biggest locks going into it, so that that in fact released me from deep feelings about my pain point. And so it makes you, it brings about you knowing yourself. It's part of the process of attainment. It obviously, because it's all the locks are associated with your pain point all the way along, and as the further you grow, the higher you attain, you're opening up locks that all have to do with your pain point and releasing you from bad perceptions, so you can see who you are. And the more you see and experience who you are, the more you love yourself, the more you like yourself, and it frees you to be able to express without negative feedback or repercussions from it.
I agree. What do you think, Mark?
I don't think I really have a lot more to add to this. I don't know what I would say.
Do you feel that the classes has helped you?
Most assuredly.
In your normal life?
Well, yes, because before this came up, before you discovered this concept, I was always, like I said, I was mystified, perplexed. Why can a single event happen and two people have such different reactions to it? It never occurred to me that somebody else was actually, because of their class, because of the way they were, was seeing something entirely different than I was seeing. I thought everybody saw things the same way, and I couldn't figure out what was wrong with me, why I couldn't see what other people were seeing or do what other people were doing. I couldn't conform when I thought everybody was the same. So what's the problem? This helps.
What do you think, Moshe?
Well, listen, the classes for me has helped me in every way. Specifically, I would say, there's so many examples, but I would say, like, in my relationship with my father, right? Like, I think, look, I know this, we can go deeper on this because, he's a Yaakov, I'm a Yaakov, right? So, but when I went deeper, it hit me like a ton of bricks when I realized that his subclass, and I know we didn't talk about this here, subclass was Yosef. It made so much sense to me. you know, the way he behaves. And then once I understood it, right, like I just like, I try to speak in his language. Let's just say that, because beforehand it's like just we're speaking different languages, you know. And now I understand it. And if I see myself kind of, you know, going, you know, speaking to him, and you know, I catch myself, you know, I'm like, oh no, he's a Yaakov Yosef. I need to talk to him like this, you know. So I think that just my relationship with my father has helped me a lot. Just my relationship in general with people has helped me a lot. I know with Yosefs how to behave with them. You know, they can be very hard asses, and they want to have their way. I let them have their way. I make them think that they have their way. Of course, you know, it's just it's, you know, kind of thing like that. They always seem to. They always seem to be. It's always they did it or they figured it out. You know, so it's one of those.
They always knew it happened.
They always knew it happened.
It was written in the dictionary.
It was something. They always knew something. And basically, what it comes down to, they always knew it or whatever. So I'm like, all right, you know, I don't fight it anymore. I just kind of roll with it. I just kind of know, okay, that's just the way he is. It's fine. I don't really. So that, you know, right there, you know, understanding Abraham's better. You know, their innate need to serve and work, you know, and I allow them to do that because that's where, you know, that's the way they are. Isaac's, you know, I probably have in my lifetime probably the hardest class for me to deal with was Isaac's. Although I would say it's just I think is that my words would rip them like a knife. Let's just say that if I would
Very sensitive.
Very sensitive. And you know, I have the funniest thing is I have the best relationships with Isaacs, but if I don't watch my tongue, it'll rip him like a knife, and you know, it could say that relationship is kind of over. So, you know, now that I'm aware of it more, I'm trying to be more cautious. You know, so look, you know, I don't want to, you know, look, it's kind of a little bit of manipulation at this point in the game, right? It's like I do kind of want to manipulate these people, but in a good way, right? So to make it win-win for both people. It's not like I'm not trying to do win-lose. I'm doing win-win. You know, I'm always trying to do win-win. So I give them what they want. I get what I want. So at the end of the day, we're both happy. So that's kind of that's one of the great things about this. Once you really kind of understand it, you can really use it, and it's beneficial for both parties. So it's a great tool.
I see it with my children, where, you know, my daughter she's an Isaac, and my son is an Avram. And my daughter, if she just thinks that I think that she's done something wrong, that's enough. She'll either apologize or she'll feel bad about it. That there's always a response. With my son, I have to sort of be much more sort of, oh, I'm going to take away your Minecraft. I have to give him the feeling, the sensation that he's going to get punished, for there to actually be sort of a feeling that he's done something wrong. So I see the differences between my children, and because I know their classes are different, and I can behave with them differently. So, like, you know, tonight I was on the other computer, and I was trying to deal with parental controls and stuff and creating usernames. And my son came down, and he felt that I was, like, you know, doing something to his game. So I, like, you know, ran with it, and I was like, yeah, you know, I'm sick and tired. You don't go to sleep in time. I'm deleting, you know, Minecraft. And he started, you know, crying. It's like, no, I'm sorry. Like, look, I'm angry. You're not going to bed on time. Every night it's a struggle. I gave him this whole conversation, and he's just like crying away. It's like, no, not my Minecraft. And then, you know, I'm like, you know, go to bed. And so he goes up to bed. And then my daughter comes down. And he's like, you know, he woke me up. You know, what's happening? I was like, oh, I just made him realize that, you know, that I was going to remove his game. And in the end, I didn't. And it's like, and then she's like, well, were you going to? I was like, no. And then she walked up. So it was, I could have like different conversations with them about the same event because of the differences in the classes. Marisa writes, it's actually easier to identify the emotional painful points and what comes out of them using the concept of soul classes. Most of my problems or pain stem from the question of validation. It's very good to perceive and take over more reasonably because I was able to take better care of the ramifications. Behind a pain point or blockage, there's always an available capacity or force after you insert the key into the lock. All right, let's move on.
Identification. Each class has an element associated with it. Abraham is water, Isaac is fire, Jacob is wind, and Joseph is earth. Additionally, each class is comprised of judgment or kindness and their externality or internality. Internality means what situation a person attracts to themselves. Externality means how they interact with these situations, with those situations. Judgment means a pushing force, while kindness means a pulling force. It is important for the individual to seriously examine their reactions to their environment, to identify their class, and not to fall into looking for attributes themselves in order to classify themselves in the class they aspire to. Generally speaking, the class that causes the individual the most irritation is most often their own class, or their class, since it activates their pain point more frequently. Adjustments can be made as reality helps clarify by giving feedback on whether the individual's discernments are correctly aligned. These discernments are crucial since the classes describe the base nature of the individual.
What do you think, Moshe?
Well, I would say like this, you know, as far as identifying people's class, right? I think it's a little bit of it's like, you know, you can have a general idea, and then I would say is, you know, you know, like for me, okay, I see somebody, I think, you know, look, I've done enough practice, you know, I can get a sense for somebody. I might not even know them. You know, I could just through their like reading or their books or whatever, like you get an idea. You know, but you got to be flexible with that, right? I'd say you have to be flexible and kind of see how they react to a certain situation. Now, I would say it can be confusing. This is where I do feel like I get confused in regards to, like, let's say subclasses. Again, something we haven't talked about. Where, you know, I could see somebody and maybe I'll sense them, you know, as a Yaakov. But really the subclass was a Yaakov, you know, and that's where I can get confused, you know. That's sometimes I can make that mistake. But I think the best way to do it is just really understanding them, the classes, and a lot of practice, you know, doing it, you know, and a little bit of you know, kind of a response adjust kind of situation. You know, you get a response, you can adjust if necessary, kind of thing, you know. Sometimes it doesn't go in a straight line, you know, like you know, how you get to a certain result. Sometimes it's going to be jagged. You're going to go make mistakes, but eventually you get to the same place, you know, you identify them correctly. So, and also I would say is also, you know, asking other people for feedback. I don't know if we talked about that, but what other people think and getting different opinions and then discussing it and stuff like that. So I think that's good.
What do you think, Mark?
The thing that struck me in here was that the sentence in there that says, generally speaking, the classes that cause the individual the most irritation is most often their class, since it activates their pain point more frequently. I've had a friend of mine that I've known for quite a number of years, and even before I knew about the classes or this identification, it occurred to me way back in my subconscious someplace that the reason I'm so upset with this guy, Dan is his name, my friend, the reason I get so angry with him is because we're identical. And that's exactly what was going on. Now that I see this or can identify Dan, he is exactly like me. He is an Isaac too. And because of what he does, it just infuriates me at times. I can't stand him. He's my friend and I hate him. So That's what I got out of it.
It's like a mirror.
Yes, and it's terrible.
I've helped people at work identify their classes and then help them understand why they're so frustrated with certain members in the team. And it's normally because they're the same class. So they basically see their own flaws. They see their own sort of like things that they would want to change in themselves, and they see them projected into somebody else, and they can't stand it.
Well, now that you mentioned that, right? So we now that you mentioned that, it's like that. It's like, you know, I'm a Yaakov, right? And it's kind of annoying to kind of deal with Yaakovs. It's kind of annoying, you know, because they're very much babies, and I know I'm the same. Complain a lot, you know.
The articles become misunderstood when you're in smallness.
What, the other Yaakovs do the same?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. But, you know, you say that, you say, oh, you know, you see yourself, you see your flaws in others, you know, because you'll say, you know, same class, dealing with the same class person, you know, people. And it can be annoying, you know, and it's like, whatever. But like, maybe, but it's enjoyable to deal with other classes too, you know, like, but I guess that's another tool. That's another tool. You did right about that, you know, to see what class irritates, what people irritate that person the most, let's say, and then kind of figure out what people don't, you know, what are classes of those people, and then you can get also another way of, you know, getting you know, zoning in to what type of class they are, you know.
I agree. Jenny writes, this is all part of helping with our advancement and agreeing with what is going on inside of us. It's all about making discernments and not falling into the earth with emotions. It's not letting our emotions take over what we desire, which is internal power. We have to remind each other of this along the way. We are on this journey together, and we picked it. We are picked to be with each other. So be excited for the future, because we're going to advance together. And that, for example, is written by a great Avram. Yeah, that's another thing which is like very interesting, is the way that people write and the emphases that they put on just really expose who they are, their class. What do you think, Cedric?
I'm thinking about my boss, and I would say that, well, I don't see how this could be similar, because my boss and I are very different, and so it would be hard for me to mirror myself on him, because he lacks many features of being a good leader, and
What class is he?
really, he should be a Joseph.
A Joseph? You sure?
Well, he always Joseph, yes, or Jacob. He always criticizes things that we do, that the team does, and he doesn't like it, and he always has a better way to do things, and you know, it's not like a
That's more
very
Jacob.
friendly. Yeah, well, yeah.
Jacob's
The
the difference between like the complaints of a Jacob and a Joseph. Jacob's will complain of how you do it. Joseph's will complain about what it represents, the values of it.
Then he's definitely a Jacob, because there's no way but his own way to do things, and that's
a Jacob thing.
Yeah, and I can't see myself on that, unless it's something that I have to change.
Well, everyone has problems with their bosses and stuff. Yeah, go for it.
Cedric, look, you gotta play the game, bro. Listen, Yaakov, right? So you gotta.
I knew it. I know it.
This is how you work it. This is how you work this guy, bro. You tell him he does amazing job in his activities or whatever. He's like, listen, first of all, you're an amazing. I love the way you manage people. You feel like you're in so control. You gotta schmooze with this guy, bro. You gotta play the game, man. Pump him up, man. You know what I'm saying?
I just wrote it down, so I'll tell you next time.
The class is a great way to suck up to people. Like, you know, it's like you find out what your boss is, and you can just like touch you can either touch their pain points when you want to rattle them.
Yes.
Or you can sort of really make them feel good by sort of touching their good points. Like, oh, you know, if it's Jacob's, like, oh, the way you manage the people, is just so amazing.
It's gotta be activities. You really gotta, whatever the activity is, if it is something that he did, like, wow, you did such a great job on it. You know what I mean? Like, you're amazing. You know what I mean? That'll, big time brownie points right there, man.
Something that I have found that have helped me identifying the classes now that I know a little bit more of them is that I can deal with difficult people. And sometimes because of business, I have to deal with many persons, and I don't know if they talk to me because they don't like me in an aggressive way, or they are just like that. Now I have learned that it's just the way they are. So some might be nice or not, but it's not because of me. It's because of the way they are. So that's when classes really become helpful on the working environment.
Definitely. I would say that classes is a very great tool for working environments because you're normally surrounded, each team normally attracts different classes. Like the normal workers are normally Avrams, the managers move towards, managerial positions. Isaacs are normally the more creative people, but they're not very good at following orders. And then you got the Josephs that are more like dealing with, they normally deal with architect and sort of the direction that things are going and the values, and HR are normally filled with Josephs, human resources.
Come to think of it, like Steve Jobs was a Yosef, right? Because his whole thing was all about the values.
Yes. Yeah.
It was all about.
Yeah, he didn't actually do things.
Right.
Like Steve Jobs didn't make products. This is one of the things that people don't understand. He didn't make products. He made other people make products. Right?
Well, I'm saying back when he was a teenager and was
But I'm
growing
saying
up.
always, even with Steve Wozniak, he hardly did like actual work. He normally set the tone. He set the direction, the vision of where it was going, and he had Steve Wozniak to do the actual physical labor.
Oh, so he didn't do anything.
He did some things, but the idea is that most of the work was done by others. He was a visionary. He, when he came back to Apple, right? He didn't do things. He directed people. He would, for example, got rid of a lot of projects because they didn't fit a certain vision. So you had all these Jacobs working on their activities and working on their projects. And what Apple was missing was someone was missing like a Joseph or an Isaac to give a vision to the company and direct it towards that vision. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So normally, like a good team is a team that includes all the different classes, and then they can sort of learn how to work with each other. All right, let's go to the diagram. So we have here a diagram of the classes, right? So you've got the 4 classes. You've got Avram, which is water, Yitzchak, which is fire, Yaakov, which is wind, and Yosef, which is earth. And what we have here is we have the yellow dot in each one is where the sense of self is, and we've got various circles to represent different areas. So we've got the environment, which is the external circle, and then we have the circle of externality, the circle of internality of the class, and then we have the core. And the idea is that you've got the green, which represents kindness and reception, and then you've got the red, which represents judgment or bestowal. So the idea is if we start with Avram, which is water, their sense of self is in their environment, because both their externality and their internality is kindness, which means it's more passive, right? Kindness is passive and judgment is active. So in Avram, he's normally very submissive and annulling into his environment. And it's like we many times say that Avram people don't do good deeds, they just do deeds and they're good. This doesn't mean that Avrams can't be violent and dangerous, but it's normally because there's some faction or group that is directing them to do that. So you could have, for example, a mafia, right? And Avram will go out and do bad things, but they're doing it on behalf of the mafia and not because of their own desires of themselves. Good soldiers are normally Avrams that do what they're told. bad soldiers are normally Isaacs because they have this idea that they want to innovate and make changes, and they can't follow orders as easily. And if we move on to Isaac, we've got, they represent fire. And the idea is that their internality is judgment and their externality is kindness. And the sense of self is really in the core. So they're just so focused on how they feel. They focus less on the environment itself. They're always focused on how things make them feel. And that's one of the ideas why they're so normally kind to their environment, is just because they don't really think about their environment too much. Very self-centered. Of all the classes, Isaacs are the most narcissistic. They think of themselves the most. Then we've got Jacobs, where their sense of self is in their externality. So they are the mediator between their externality and their environment, and that's why they tend to be managers, because they're managing their environment. And they have that internal kindness that allows, on one hand, they have this external judgment, and they can sometimes be very harsh, but they have this internal kindness that makes the environment feel that they're not really that dangerous, and that their judgment is sort of more they're more interacting with that judgment, with that active push, but people can feel they're actually kind within. And then you have Joseph's, where the sense of self is in between their internality and their externality. And they sort of, people tend to think that Josephs think of themselves. They don't. In fact, the class that least thinks of themselves is actually Joseph's, because they're hovering, you could say, above their internality and externality in their environment. So that's why they deal more with values and morals and ethics, because they're dealing more with the perception of situations and not the situations or the people in those situations. Because of their internal and external judgment, they are very active in their tendency to judge situations and think that people are doing things wrong or right, and so forth. What do you think?
I'm just curious to know more in depth the interactions between the class and the subclass. Like, for example, comparing an Abraham that has a subclass of Yosef versus, let's say, for example, the reverse, someone who has a class of Yosef but has a subclass of Abraham. Like those things right now, I can't clearly identify yet. And I'm just wondering how, and then add on top of that, whether they're an introvert or an extrovert. Like those things, that's what, that's my curiosity. That's where my curiosity is trying to like assess.
One of the ways to, for example, identify if someone's got a difference between their main class and their subclass is, if someone has their main class and the subclass the same, they'll behave normally the same in, let's say, their family and their work environment. So they've got a very consistent behavior around their different environments of friends, family, work, etc. When there's a difference where, let's say, at home they're subservient, but at work they're very dominant, or the other way around, where at work they're very submissive and then they come home and they're very dominant, normally shows a difference between the main class and the subclass, because they feel comfortable to show either. And then the question is, well, then which is the main and which is the subclass? You can normally know by the complaints of a person. It's funny. It's harder to identify someone by their pleasure. It's easier to identify people by the complaints. And normally the main class will be the main focus of their complaints. So Joseph's will normally complain about injustice. Avram's will normally complain about the lack of support from their environment. Right? So you can then, by analyzing someone's complaints, you can actually see what their tendency is. And the complaints normally stay the same no matter what environment they're in. So when they're behaving nicely, it's harder to see the difference. But when they're complaining, that's when you can actually see who they are.
Why is it important to have a subclass? I mean, I know that's internal, but I mean, what can that do for you? as far as making discernments and your advancement and really basically what you can accomplish with it. You know, being having a Yosef subclass.
You could say you have a wider range. So you could say there's two kind of options. One is like, you know, I'm an Isaac, right? So I've got less range and I've got more focus. So it's like I've got more energy to spend in one direction. If someone has a main class and a subclass, they have, on one hand, less energy to spend on one class, but they have more range of options. So for example, let's say someone's a Joseph Avram, or an Avram Joseph, right? Then they've got the extremes of complete judgment and complete kindness. So that gives them a wider range of choices than, let's say, me, who's just an Isaac. So my internality is always judgmental and my externality is always kind. No one, you know, you won't hear anyone saying that I'm sort of a nasty person to be around. What you will hear is people saying that I'm narcissistic and I only think about myself, and that I'm always, you know, in fear. Like, you know, my parents, when I was younger, they used to call me a shipwreck because I would shiver. You know, I was always worrying about things. So I would say that's the difference between having focus and having breadth, having sort of a wider variety, you could say.
And how can that help one along the path?
Well, it's two different ways. It's like, you know, the difference between having a better fork or a knife and a fork. So I would say like this, it's not that one is better, like, oh, if you're this class, you're better for advancement. If you're this class, you're better for advancement. The idea is for the person to find out who they are, right? So whether they have the main class and subclass different or not, that's who they are. And the idea is to learn about their abilities and use them to the fullest. So it's not like you can choose. It's not like, oh, I don't want to be an Avram Joseph. I want to be an Avram. You don't have a choice in the matter. So the idea is to sort of accept who you are, and then from that move on to see what the strengths are, what the weaknesses are, and work with them. So
I understand that. I just wanted to be able to work with it and to have like the most internal power that I can possibly have. And
so the best thing is to accept
reach that.
So the best thing is to accept. The problem that normally people have is at the beginning they don't like one of their classes, either the main class or the subclass. And
I understand that.
And you have to, you know, learn how to accept it, to be able to work with it. You can't use something unless you accept it. You can't use a fork unless you accept it's a fork. And you can't use a knife unless you accept it's a knife. So if you're an Avram Joseph, you know, Avram main class and Joseph subclass, you need to accept that to be able to use either class. And what normally happens is that people don't accept one of them, and then it's like they're half a person. They don't have at their disposal half of their abilities. So the quicker they can actually reach acceptance of it, the more they can use both qualities to actually help them move forward. So you could say the problem with, let's say, an Avram is because they're so passive, they're so kind, they need their environment to be more active to push them to do things. While, let's say, Joseph, they have the active push. They don't need to be pushed at all. They might need to work better on their, you know, sort of aligning with the group and stuff like that. But from a pushing perspective, they have enough energy to push them forward. So the idea is by identifying your class, you can know how to better align your environment around you and to know how to use them.
And so I guess that will be like as when I'm like advancing, I'll be able to see that a little bit more.
Yes, definitely.
Awesome.
You know, you're in the training, so it is in the training. You're training. You're getting to learn about yourself, all different sides to you that you might have not met before. What do you think, Mark?
Well, I like this a lot. I've always liked the diagrams. It's one thing to talk about it, but it's much better for me to see it in a diagram. So I like it. I do. All I can say.
What do you think, Robin?
Well, I was looking at the diagram and kind of superimposing a subclass on another class to see the dynamics that kind of main class and subclass would be dealing with, and the range of their experience. And it would seem like it's harder to get oriented with the subclass, but maybe not. Maybe with the spectrum, it just increases the perspective, like right and left eyes or something.
You could say it's like the difference between, let's say, a laser and more of a machine gun. So machine gun can sort of, cover an entire area, while laser is more specific on a specific point.
Really, this is a great diagram, though. It really, I can't see how it would not help anybody that looked at it. I mean, in the beginning, we didn't have this. It was just the 4 classes, and there was not the detail. This is really wonderful.
And I know that, in the coming weeks, when we go over the different classes, articles that we have, we'll, able to expose more deeper and deeper insights on them. Anybody else?
Yeah, quick question. I just realized that Abraham's are pure reception and Joseph's are pure bestowal.
Yeah. Which is funny because so many people think that Josephs think about themselves. The last thing that Joseph thinks about themselves. You ask Joseph, you try to tell them, how do you feel? And they'll always respond of what they think of other people. They won't able to tell you how they feel. Right? And if you ask an Isaac that question, you normally get the hilarious opposite, where they won't tell you what they think of others. They'll tell you how they felt from it. It's like, they won't. It's like, if a Joseph says, he hurt me, the focus is on he. And if an Isaac says he hurt me, his focus is on me.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So it's the same sentence. You're like, oh, they both said the same sentence, so they must be the same class. Like, what was the emphasis on? The Joseph is more about the blame. It's like, he is terrible. He did wrong. Right? And the Isaac is more like, I felt wrong. I felt pain. It was all, it's like, it's as if they don't give appreciation to the other side, because they're so self-centered.
Diagrams are just great.
And they're self-centered because they've got that judgment, which is internal, which is on one hand that bestow, but they have that kindness around it that sort of allows that judgment, that activity to build within them.
I didn't know that, Zakai. That is new for me. This kindness, reception, judgment, bestowal. That to me seems completely backwards. I never thought of it like that. We'll have to dig into that a little more, because I really want to know more.
Well, think of it like this way. Avrams are subservient to their environment, right?
Yes, it's almost like, but it's like they're working.
So they're in reception. They're just like, they're just receiving. They're annulling to the environment. So they're dealing with the input from the environment. Well, Josephs, they don't deal with the input from the environment. They're about like giving to the environment. They're about telling the environment what they think, what their opinion is. They're not interested in what the environment's opinion is.
But look, it really is depends on what perspective you're looking at it. Because look, if we look at the left and right lines, the left line is usually judgment, and the right line is usually kindness.
Right.
So what are we saying here? The right line is reception, and the left line is bestowal. So it's kind of backward.
So it depends what you're focusing on, right? If you're focusing on the environment, right, then what will happen is the Avram will be in reception because he will be receiving from his environment, right? While the Joseph will be giving to the environment. Just like a Jacob gives to the environment externally. They're managers, right? But they receive the sort of the support from the environment at the same time.
Zaka, you can look at it both ways.
Exactly. I agree. But here we're talking about in the sense of the environment. So in the sense of the environment, right? In the way that the class is sort of interacting with that environment, the Avram is focused more, their sense of self is in the environment and not in their internality. So they're in the reception. If we say that reality is reception and internality is bestowal, then you can see how it makes sense.
Yeah, because I said internality is bestowal and externality is reception, because we're receiving reality.
Exactly.
We're receiving reality.
The senses, the input, the sensation or input. Right, you receive
reality is reception, is externality. That I agree with.
Yeah.
And internality is bestowal, is actually creating reality.
Exactly. So you can see that's why the workers are Avrams, because they receive, they're told what to do, right? And they respond accordingly. With Joseph, it's the other way around. They dictate what's going to happen. The Joseph's
okay, in that sense, I can see that.
They normally, like, you know, set the vision of the society or you know, where people are going and values and morals. They're all done by Joseph. No, the Kabbalists were Joseph's mostly. So, you know, they're more about giving to their dictating, you know, control, right, is bestowal, right? So the Josephs normally control their environment. They're less about receiving from their environment.
But can we say, was I correct to say that the left line is reception and the right line is bestowal? Is that true?
That is true. That is true.
Okay. So how come that's true and then this is true as well?
So the idea is that what are you looking at? Are you looking at how you're receiving things, or are you looking at how you're giving things? Like, are you dealing with alignment, or are you dealing with expression? If you're dealing with alignment, right, then the right line is bestowal and the left line is reception.
Okay.
Right? If you're dealing with expression, it's the other way around. The left line becomes bestowal and the right line becomes.
Okay, so this is completely new for me. And why is that the case? In the expression,
like we say that the heroes and the enemies, right? The evil people, right? Yeah. They normally represent the left line, right?
Right.
But what are they dealing with? Are they dealing with the receiver or in control?
They want to control.
Exactly, right? So on one hand, we say the left line is reception, but they're actually dealing with control, so that's actually bestowal. And then you've got the heroes, right? Which they're, you know, normally annulling to the environment, and they're the right line. But what are they dealing with? They're dealing with, they want to feel good. They don't want to control. So they're actually reception on the right.
Okay. You could see the difference, but why is expression have it like that? Why is the expression the right line is reception and the left line bestowal? Why is it like that?
If you look at the three lines, right, the tikkun kavim, the correction of the lines, the right line represents alignment, that's smallness, right? Then you've got the left line, which represents greatness, because you remember in smallness, the emotion is detached from the person. When that emotion returns to the person, that becomes the left line. So then you have the right line, which is that smallness, that, you know, the GE, what you say. And when the ahap returns to that degree, it returns as the left line. So then you've got the greatness representing the left line, because it's returned to its degree. And you've got the right line, which is the smallness, right? And they fight together. They fight against each other, because the right line is like, you know, you're meant to annul to, you're meant to bestow to the creator, which means to your subconscious. And the left line, it says, no, you need to control, you need to manipulate, you need to create things. The problem is that you can't do expression without alignment, right? So that's why they fight. So on one hand, there's darkness for the left line because it wants to create effects, but it has no alignment. It's like wanting to change the government, but not existing with the infrastructure, right? It's like if you want to get elected to change something in the government, you need to agree with the election process to become elected. And so you can't be totally against the government if you want to be elected into the government, right? So you have that fight between them. Then you have the whole correction of the middle line. And what that does is it swaps them around. It mixes them, that the left line actually becomes the right line and the right line becomes the left line. So what you have then is that the left line, which wanted to do expression, actually works on alignment. And the right line that was working on alignment actually turns into expression. And that's why sometimes they can, you know, they can twist around, turn around.
Very complicated. I know you explained it once. I didn't get all that, but
But basically what happens is it depends on what your orientation
I
is.
think that's really what I'm missing here, is that depending on the orientation part. That's what, and I want to know what are the orientation? That's what I'm trying to say. Well, that's my question. What you know? It seems very easy for me to know
we're always dealing with expression and alignment, right? Alignment is normally bottom up, right? You're going from you're aligning the perception to the subconscious, right? So you're going from bottom up, right? From causeless to purity, right? When you're doing expression, that's manifestation. So you're manifesting something from your subconscious into your perception, into reality, right? And that would be considered.
So you're manifesting from subconscious into your perception. Is that it?
Yeah. And that would be considered, top down. You're going from your subconscious all the way down to reality that, is seen through your perception. Right? So you're going from subconscious to perception.
Into reality, and then your perception views that reality, right?
Well, you could say, that's just like saying what's before the chicken or the egg. The idea is that your perception is seeing a result, right? That is being drawn from your subconscious.
Right.
You see it in looking outside of you, so it seems like it's in reality, but it's still part of your perception. So the idea is that is expression, so it's going top down.
Okay.
Right? So if you keep it that the right line is going bottom up and the left line is going top down, right? Then it makes sense that the left line is expression and the right line is alignment. Because the right line is going bottom up and the left line is going top down. Mm-hmm. But when you have the correction of the middle line, they swap around. So what happens is that the right line becomes top down and the left line becomes bottom up. So that means now the left line is actually dealing with alignment and the right line is actually dealing with expression.
Why does that happen?
Because the thing is that you can't change something unless you agree with it.
The swap, I'm saying, they talk about.
Yes, that's why the swap has to work. You have to work from a sense of alignment. Let's say, for example, you have some criticism in the group, right? You don't like something that the group is doing. The wrong approach is to immediately come to the group and say, I see that you're all doing something wrong. Why is that wrong? Because what you're doing is you're excluding yourself from the group, right? You're allowing that one thing that you don't agree with to separate yourself from the group and be like, oh, I'm the smart one, you're all morons. You're all just followers, and I'm the one who actually knows the truth. And what that does is it alienates you from the situation. What's the correct approach? The correct approach is to give the criticism as part of the group. So you're actually aligning with the group, like you include yourself in the criticism instead of showing the criticism as external to you. So that is that correction of the lines where you're swapping it. You're doing the expression, you're doing the desire to change because you want to align even more to the group. So then the expression becomes part of the alignment. That's the correction of it, right? And the problem is if you try to do expression without that alignment, then it's called darkness because you're alienating yourself from the group. So the only way is to actually swap sides, where the reason you're doing criticism is in order to align, right? And you're aligning in order to do criticism.
That's the swap?
Yeah.
I see.
Right? It's like, why are you doing criticism? Because I want to align more to the group. And then they can say, well, why are you trying to align to the group? It's because I want to express criticism.
Okay, that makes a little more sense.
And that's how they swap around. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a little more sense, yeah.
What do you think, Robin?
I was one.
Yeah, Cedric, go for it. No, go for it.
Oh, okay, sorry. I was wondering if, depending on the class, it's easier to do expression.
Josephs are the best at doing expression.
Oh, so
hands down.
I mean, due to the class's attributes, it can be easier to do expression.
I'd say this. Avrams do expression in order to change their environment, to have a more supporting environment.
It can be easier to do expression for Josephs.
Yeah, it works to the pain point. So, Avrams will use their internal power to manipulate their environment to support them. Isaacs will manipulate their environment so they'll leave them alone. Jacobs will manipulate their environment to get that, to like able to manage them easier, right? To get them to do what they want easier. But Josephs are the only class that the reason why they do expression is for expression's sake. They manipulate people not because they actually want something done. They're doing the control because they love control. Does that make sense?
Sure, definitely. Thanks.
What do you think, Robin?
I was just going to ask a question. On Joseph's the inner circle, the interior of Joseph, all the arrows are going inward. Is that because the outer judgment is focusing on their core, or I don't understand that.
Yeah, so the idea is what's happening is that's why they're in the middle, because they've got two opposing directions. So they've got a force pulling them in and they've got a force pushing them out. And that's where they get stuck in the middle. Does it make sense?
Yes. So they really feel themselves very, well, they don't feel themselves.
They don't feel themselves. They're above it. They're above it. It's like if you have two, it's like magnets, right? If you have two opposing forces, it actually raises the thing in the air. It raises it above it. If you just have a pulling force, then it's pulled in. If you've got a pushing force, it's pushed out. But if you've got two opposing forces, what happens to the object in the middle? It rises up into the air.
I see. Oh boy, Joseph. I feel sorry for him.
Says Navram. What do you think, Mark?
Well, and yeah, I think you've talked about this before, but of all the classes, Yakov is can be like a knife for me. But Yosef, I've always had trouble with Yosef because I thought it was so personal. And I guess with them, it really isn't personal, is it?
It's just business.
Right, right. But I have always taken that as personal. You felt horrible towards Yosef.
But that's because Isaacs don't know what business is. Isaacs, it's always personal.
True.
They'll say it's not personal, but it's always personal. They'll be like, I'm fine. No, you're totally right. And then afterwards, they'll be like, why would they say that to me? They hurt my feelings. I took it so personally. And then somebody else will say, like, well, why are you taking it so personally? It was just business. It's like, we can't help ourselves as Isaacs. We always take everything personally.
Well, how about Yaakovs? Aren't they control freaks? We're trying to control everything outside of us.
They only want to control to get things done.
Okay, and Yosef wants to control for the sake of control. We have an object goal.
Exactly.
Desire.
Like you have a dependency, and once that dependency is done, then you don't do control anymore. Josephs will continue doing control even though there's nothing to, there's nothing they need.
And what about Yitzchak?
Yitzchak will do it so that people leave them alone.
And if he's alone?
So then he has nothing to do using internal powerful.
Okay.
What do you think of the classes, Azaria?
Oh, I've already learned this. It's well done.
But what do you think of the concept?
What, the concept of the classes?
Yeah.
Well, yesterday I had to think about it, and it kind of seems to me as it's basically telling out secrets. Because the moment you know someone's class, you know how to address and manipulate the way he perceives things, accepts them.
True.
Even on a low basis of knowledge, it's a secret of control.
Yeah. It's knowing people's patterns and knowing how to identify.
Yeah, knowing how they perceive things and how to basically pave the trail.
Exactly.
Because you know the way they see things, then you put it in the way you want them to see it. You know how they will address to it. It's just like if you know that you're talking to a Yitzhak, if you want to compliment him, you have to know that when you're complimenting him, it's not about things he does, it's about who he is.
Yes.
Okay, and when you do things according to the rules, then the outcome is also very, very similar. Basically it's a concept that you also need to learn internally and use externally.
I agree. Anybody else before we end the session? All right, let's stop the recording and enter the after party.